So, slight PSA here. We're going to be changing how uploads occur on this channel. No longer will there be dedicated uploads every few weeks or every month or so. Instead, what's going to happen is that this channel is going to be treated like a passion project for us, which is what it was always meant to be. And because of that, we're going to be uploading when we write stories that we want to share. This is going to be a creative outlet, something that we love to do. For me, that is going to probably lead to a lot of 20-minute videos and a lot more longer videos. Like, for example, I'm writing one about the slave trade at the moment because I'm fascinated by a particular story that I've read about it. So that's what you have to look forward to on this channel. Little less frequently, but in a funny way, you'll be getting the greater of two Weevils and getting longer, more interesting stories. Junks. That's right, Chinese junks. For many of the younger viewers of this channel, you were most likely introduced to them and the concept of them in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean 3. With some notable exceptions, the junk was a smaller, wooden-built craft with stern-mounted rudders and battened sails. Their origins can be traced back to old rivercraft along the great rivers of ancient China, and we think they originated in about 2800 BC or possibly even earlier during the Song Dynasty. And as they evolved, they introduced some amazing revolutionary ideas to ship construction, including, and I kid you not, rudimentary watertight bulkheads. Although not as deadly or impressive as, say for example, a ship of the line, and absolutely outclassed by European technology as seen by the exploits of the Nemesis, the humble little junk is a beautiful craft. It is a genuinely stunning craft that connects the past to the present. But what if I told you that Australia had a squadron of these old windjammers built? See, now I have your attention. Welcome back to the Lesser of Two Weevils, where today we'll be talking about the Australian fleet of junks from the Second World War. The World Wars delivered to us a veritable catalogue of unconventional weapons fielded by all the world's powers, be it sailing raiders such as SMS The Adler during the First World War or the Q ships. But few were quite as genius as the little Snake-class junks of the Royal Australian Navy. See, these 6 small vessels, outwardly looking like the same kind of craft that had plied the waters of Asia for thousands of years, did a job that only they could do. Espionage. The Snake class has its origins way back when the Services Reconnaissance Department, the SRD, aka the Australian cover name for Special Operations, established its naval section in January 1944. But it was here that the SRD found itself with a critical problem. The naval section existed to transport special forces parties ashore and their supplies behind Japanese lines, but it possessed only 2 vessels for this purpose. One of these was the Crate, a 70-foot Japanese fishing boat originally named Kofuku Maru, that had already made history in Operation Jaywick, and the Alatna, a modest 62-foot Australian Army launch used as a tender. If you would like to learn more about Jaywick and the Crate and the raid on Singapore, I made a video about it on my main channel, link in the pinned comment below. But to say the least, just 2 vessels were hopelessly inadequate for the scale of operations being contemplated across the Southwest Pacific. While the Americans were island hopping to the northeast, Japan still controlled Borneo, the Celebes, Java, Sumatra, Portuguese Timor, Malaya and more. Allied planners needed vessels that could slip through those occupied waters without attracting a lot of attention. See, the thing is, Indonesia, and really the whole Java Sea, was a giant trap. Once you sailed in, there was only a handful of choke points to get out. HMAS Perth learnt this the hard way going down in March 1942 while trying to pierce the Sunda Strait with USS Houston. That meant that conventional warships were useless for this purpose as their silhouettes were unmistakable, and any approach to enemy-held shore would invite immediate challenger attack. A standard sailing craft would stick out too, like a sore thumb, because, well, simply put, a European boat in Asia raises eyebrows just as it has for hundreds of years. There was a solution though, and very quietly it began to take shape in a shipyard in Williamstown, Victoria. 4 trawler-type vessels were under construction there for the Australian Army. It was here that the SRD had a light bulb moment, and it moved quickly to acquire them. On the 26th of March 1944, all 4 were officially transferred from the Army to the SRD, and what followed was a program of structural modifications designed to make the vessels virtually unrecognisable as military craft or modern vessels. Their superstructures were rebuilt and restyled so that to a distant observer or a Japanese coastal lookout, depending on who you were, they looked just like junks. the exact same junks that had worked around the waters of Singapore and Southeast Asia for millennia. From a distance, there was nothing separating them from the vessels that you see on the screen in movies from this period in China. Just simple, ordinary commercial craft carrying ordinary cargoes or fish. Nothing special. Happy with their work, the SRD put in an order for 2 further vessels from the Millers Bunnings shipbuilding yards in Fremantle, Western Australia, and a 7th would later be ordered from Williamstown but cancelled in August 1945 as the war would draw to a close. These new vessels would be commissioned as the Snake class, and they hold the fun little technicality of being the only commissioned junks in the Royal Australian Navy. Each vessel displaced approximately 80 tonnes and measured around 20 metres long and 5.1 metres wide with a very shallow draft of just 2.3 metres. Unlike the typical junk though, the boats did have an ace up their sleeves in the form of a single Grey Marine 64 diesel engine, which generated 300 horsepower through a single screw, giving it a top speed of 9 knots if the wind should die. The small vessels under power would have a range of 500 nautical miles, which isn't much, but after all, they were sailing ships. This meant that while operating from forward bases, they could reach deep in occupied territory and return without resupply. Below decks, the small craft could actually embark 20 tons of cargo. This meant that the Snakes could deliver not only commando teams, but the weapons, explosives, radio equipment, boats, and other supplies those teams needed to sustain extended operations in enemy territory. Each vessel would also carry a crew of 9 men, drawn not exclusively from the Royal Australian Navy, but from across the services, which reflects the nature of the SRD's work. And their armament was, by the standards of the fact that they were small wooden boats, extremely punchy. See, they carried up to 2 Oerlikon 20mm cannons and 3 or 4 M2 Browning machine guns or Bren guns. The idea was that they would never need to be used, but can you imagine a small Japanese patrol boat rocking up against a little Chinese junk and then all of a sudden it drops out 2 20mm Oerlikons? It'd be a massacre. The commissioned vessels were HMS Black Snake, Diamond Snake, Grass Snake, River Snake, and Sea Snake. The 7th incomplete vessel was to be named Coral Snake, but like I said, she was cancelled before the war ended. The vessels commenced operations in late 1944 and operated from a chain of forward bases stretching across the northern rim of Allied-controlled zones from Darwin in the Northern Territory to Morotai in the Moluccas, New Guinea, the Philippines, and Borneo. From these staging posts, they punched deep into Japanese-controlled waters. 4 of the 6, Tiger Snake, Black Snake, Sea Snake, and River Snake, actually undertook operations in Japanese-held territory. Together, they completed 11 missions before Japan's surrender ended the war. The other 2, Grass Snake and Diamond Snake, were commissioned later and did not see operational service before the conflict ended. Z Special Unit carried out a total of 81 covert operations across the Southwest Pacific Theatre, inserting parties by parachute, submarine, and small craft to gather intelligence, conduct sabotage, and organise indigenous resistance networks. I want to take a moment to point this out. When Japan took an island in the Pacific, quite often the people who fought hardest and longest with resisting were the natives, and quite often they get little to no credit. Central to the Snake class's operational method was the use of foal boats or collapsible 2-man kayaks that could be assembled and launched from the junk's decks to carry small parties the final distance ashore. The foal boats were used in these operations were the Australian-built Hohen-type military foal boat designed by John Hohen and manufactured in Australia specifically for this purpose. These craft had already proven their worth in Operation Jaywick, where Z Special Unit operatives had paddled through Singapore Harbour to attach limpet mines to Japanese shipping. Again, pin comment if you want to learn more about Operation Jaywick. The way this all worked was pretty simple. The fishing boat would sail up to the occupied coastline looking completely normal and in place. Darkness would appear, and then they would launch their foal boats and sail away. By the time the foal boats reached shore, the junk was gone, or it could return back when needed at a designated time, and it would leave no sign of any Allied military presence, no smoke, nothing. It would be like it never existed. One of the most significant Snake-class missions was carried out by River Snake on the 23rd of April 1945 when it landed a Z Special Unit party in Timor, today known as East Timor. The small colony at the time was nominally neutral under Portuguese rule, but it was nonetheless occupied by Japan in early 1942. Even though it was occupied, it remained a critical area for Allied intelligence given its proximity to the main base in Darwin and the sea lanes of the Timor Sea. The party from River Snake was deployed for a long-term surveillance mission and intelligence gathering under Operation Sun Charlie. Using foal boats to make the final approach, the operatives were inserted to observe and report on Japanese activities, and their information was crucial in planning troop movements in the north of Australia and naval movements in the area. HMAS Black Snake also played a key role in supporting native allies and, of course, espionage. Commanded by Sub-Lieutenant John Key, Black Snake undertook at least 2 notable operations in the Celebes archipelago. On the 26th of April 1945, a party of 9, including Key himself, deployed by foalboat from Black Snake off the west coast of Mallow Island. The party landed at Perth, and with the aim of assisting local boats, whose crews were supporting Allied forces with information and rescuing downed pilots in the region. The party then split, and a group continued to the nearby island of Tafur to provide assistance and medical attention to the local population, and the idea was to create a sense of loyalty with the local communities to the Allied cause. Less than 3 weeks later, on the 16th of May 1945, Black Snake was in action again during Operation Swift. A foalboat party was dispatched from the vessel out to Lolota Island in the Celebes Sea to carry out general intelligence gathering. Perhaps the most vivid of the Snake-class operations took place in the final days of the Pacific War, when Tiger Snake sailed to Sarawak as part of Operation Samut. Samut was a series of recon and guerrilla warfare operations conducted by Zed Special Unit in 1945, designed to support the Australian 9th Division's assault on North Borneo. Split into 4 sub-operations, Samut targeted the jungles and river valleys of Sarawak, gathering intelligence on Japanese troop dispositions and organising indigenous Dayak and Iban peoples into resistance groups. Between the 13th and 23rd of August 1945, Tiger Snake moored at Muka, a coastal town in Sarawak, and from there, party leaders Lieutenant Rowan Waddy and Lieutenant Ron Hoey launched their foalboats and paddled up the Muka River, working with local native guides to locate and engage any remaining hostile Japanese groups in the area. This operation sadly hasn't been covered much in history, but it brings to mind some vivid imagery often connected to operations with spies in Vietnam, not the jungles of World War II. Japan's surrender was announced on the 15th of August 1945 while the men were still out in the field, but they continued their mission regardless because even though the war was technically over, the news hadn't yet reached everyone. The most interesting event in this whole operation was when the 2 officers found themselves upriver in their foalboat, deep behind Japanese lines, when without warning a crocodile attacked the men. They couldn't shoot it because a gunshot would give away their location, so they had to drive it off by fighting the crocodile in what can only be described as a man versus reptile style duel. For those wondering, the Australians won. Japan's surrender in 1945 rendered the Snake-class vessels immediately surplus to military requirements. The Royal Australian Navy had no peacetime need for these disguised junks. However effective they were, they just didn't have a job anymore. All but one of the 6 ships were transferred to the British Borneo Civil Administration Unit between November and December 1945. The exception was HMAS Diamond Snake, which was transferred to the Australian Army on the 19th of October 1945, before the other 5 went to Borneo. The boats were only in Australian service for 12 months, but now, under control of authorities in Borneo, took on the role of actually being junks, delivering humanitarian aid and cargo and transport across the islands, and which was by war's end a wreck. The boats would continue in service for years, helping rebuild and support local communities and in a way fulfilling the old traditional role of a junk as a river and local coastal cargo vessel. Now this video is a little outside the scope of our regular Age of Sail stories, but it is a sailing story nonetheless, and one that I can take a fair wager many of you will have never heard about. I had no idea either until I read a book while researching my video for Operation Jaywick, and honestly I think it's one of the coolest parts of this channel is we can talk about how the Age of Sail and fighting under sail, it didn't really just go away. Sail still had and still has an important role to play in our world. If you'd like to learn more fun stories like this from the Age of Sail, please do like, comment and subscribe, and always remember to choose the lesser of 2 evils.